Good afternoon. I'm here with a subject matter of AI that works, which actually seems rather tongue-in-cheek after Sam's presentation. So I'm here to talk to you about the old stuff, whereas Sam talked to you about the new stuff, which is the guided help, the guided processes that we've talked about. And when I say the old stuff, I've actually been working with this technology now for over 25 years. And I know, and I can tell you that it works. You also heard from Chris from E earlier on, explaining to you how E have deployed it, and again, demonstrating to you that it works. It therefore continually surprises me that we don't have more organizations actually making use of this and gaining the benefits that it can deliver. But I also understand it's still, I think, seen as a little bit of a black art. People don't understand it. So I'm here, hopefully, to kind of simplify that a little bit for you and explain to you why I think you should all be doing it. I would be if my clicker was working. Okay, so quickly, I'm just going to talk about what we see as being the problem and why, or effectively the reason why you'd be looking to utilize it, what you want to address. Then I'll kind of outline the solution. I think at this stage in the day, it's very difficult finding something new to say, so I don't think that there should be any surprises. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by process guidance, what eGain can deliver, and how we can help make that easy for you. So fundamentally, if you like, in the environment, the contact center environment is getting more complicated. I hope you don't mind, Chris. I tend to use an example from Orange in the old days, many days ago, to explain this. When I first started working with Orange, which was back in 1996, they supported 4 handset types. You could make a call with a handset. You could receive a call with a handset, full stop. If you just imagine what that environment is like nowadays for EE, you can understand, if you like, why things have got so much more complicated for the agents and why they actually need so much more help. And not all types of contact are equal. So when we talk about knowledge management, we're very much not talking about a one-size-fits-all. As the slide illustrates, and it's never quite that black and white either, or yellow in this case, they tend to fall into 3 buckets, but there are a lot of crossover. So it can be the relatively simple, tell me something, which could be as easy as, what are your opening hours? It could be transactional, I've changed my address, how do I do that? Or we might have a particular problem that needs some sort of help to solve. My phone has stopped working, my battery's running out too quickly, what can you help me do about it? So we have quite a mix of contact types. And not unsurprisingly, they tend to break down into a curve a little bit like this. So the informational queries tend to be much higher in frequency and less complexity. The transactional, slightly less in terms of frequency. They can be an element of complexity, particularly depending on your processes and the legacy systems that your agents are using to answer those queries. And the diagnostic type of ones can get really quite complex. So kind of long, complex processes, difficulty actually solving problems when there are lots of factors and situations to be taken into account. So what we actually have is an area of the informational transactional, which are much easier to allow customers to self-serve and solve themselves. But you then end up with an area in the area of complexity, which are very much more difficult now for your agents to solve. So particularly as you're bringing new agents on board with the kind of typical churning contact centers, the kind of questions they are being asked, the information they need to know to solve those is getting far more difficult. They need a lot more help. Now, what we then see, though, and eGain ran a survey with Forrester just over a year ago, actually looking at what were the reasons advisors actually struggled so much to help the customers. And not unsurprisingly, they're still using a lot of legacy systems. They have different information sources. They don't actually know what the kind of correct information is. They don't get the right training. So that's really one of the things we look to address. And what we also tend to find when I go into contact centers and start looking around, it's not even as easy as the systems that you provide. If they haven't got the information readily to hand, they use a whole variety of different things. So there'll still be probably lots of documents, sort of training manuals on desks. They'll still be emailing each other. They'll be putting bookmarks up. I see like screens with post-it notes all over it. Sort of floor walkers that are actually asking their colleagues. And I had a great example of this in a contact centre I visited about 4 weeks ago, whereby the advisor taking the customer query didn't know the answer. It was kind of a rare query, quite unusual, but he thought he knew somebody that had had that recently. So he went to one of the team leads, and they began a conversation of this whilst the customer is on the phone. Team lead wasn't quite sure about this, but thought they also knew somebody that knew. So I actually sat and observed a huddle of 10 minutes whilst the customer was on phone with 3 people trying to discuss what the problem was. And they finally got pointed to an item on their intranet, which apparently answered the question, but nobody had known so. And that information then didn't get shared anywhere else, so potentially a month down the line, that's going to happen all over again. So those are the kind of issues that we're seeing. You know, information is hard to find. It could be multiple sources of information, so it's ambiguous. It can be contradictory. You know, actually, agents not even knowing whether that information is in date or not. And all of these things start to impact the service that they provide to their customers. Again, a nice little anecdote. I'm working with a customer in Dubai, and one of the things that prompted them looking for a knowledge management system was a customer walking into one of their retail stores with transcripts and recordings on their phone of 9 different situations where they had asked exactly the same question of the company in a variety of different ways and had 9 different answers. Now, I don't suppose that number is typical, but it is typical of the kind of challenges that agents are facing when put under a lot of pressure in the contact centre with these complex inquiries. So it sounds as though it should be quite straightforward. You know, the solution is to just make appropriate content available when it's needed. But it's not just about content, and very much kind of I like to talk about knowledge. And now, this is an analogy that I do like to use and I've been using for nearly 20 years in terms of what's the difference between content and knowledge. You know, content to my mind is the map. You know, it's got all of the information I would need to get me from A to B, but there is a lot of information there. I've got to have probably a sense of direction and understand kind of where I'm heading to. Where I'm heading to. It doesn't give me any information about what the best route might be. It doesn't tell me about any blockers. It doesn't give me indication about which might be the fastest route, whereas we're all familiar nowadays with sat-navs that actually kind of overcome those problems. And as somebody with a very bad sense of direction, the sat-nav is the saving grace for me. But what the sat-nav does, of course, is simply look at that specific journey. It guides me in the most kind of efficient and effective way. I don't kind of lose track by kind of going off the path, and it helps me to get to where I want to go in the fastest way with the least number of issues. And ideally, of course, I do get to where I want to go. Unlike actually Jane, who I hope she won't mind me mentioning it, because she posted something only yesterday, which turns out there are 2 Chiswell streets. So clearly, if as the advisor you actually start looking for the end point and don't allow the situation to the system to kind of guide you, you can still end up in the wrong place. So when would we use process guidance? It is, it's time-consuming to deploy, but the benefits of doing so are significant. You do it where there are distinct steps in a process that you want somebody to follow. So in other words, you want them to be compliant. If there are 1 or more decision points that they have to make that can change the outcome, then our guided help, also AI, can help step you through that. Or where there are different outcomes under different situations. So if, depending on whether it's kind of, customer A or customer B, the type of device that they've got, then it's also appropriate. And what it's then doing is the kind of conversational kind of guidance to the agent to get them through all of that information to the right place. Now, I think one of the things that stops people doing it is that it is perceived as being difficult. We actually have a very structured approach that we can take you through in terms of how do you approach that and how do you actually get to the right place. We start off by identifying, it says here about possible outcomes, but actually you need to start by understanding what your contact types are that you actually want to address. So what are the questions the customer is asking you that are leading to that complexity? You then identify the possible outcomes, the way you want to go to, and then we simply map out what are all the different steps and questions and answers that take you through that process to get you to the end point. Now that then starts to sound a little bit like decision trees, and that's something we don't like to talk about, and I will explain that in a moment, because one of the things that eGain AI does is to help you do that in the most efficient way, not just from a user perspective, but also from an author perspective. But it's not enough just to get somebody there in the most efficient way. What you also need to start thinking about as businesses is once you've got that process flow mapped out, is there any next best action? Is there any information that you want to be providing to the customer along that route, which would either be of interest, that might stop them phoning up about future problems, that might help potentially prompt them to make a sale? And is it also delivered in the tone of voice that is consistent with your corporate style? So what you're looking to do is to build a blueprint of what that best process is, that the process your best agent would actually be following if they were in front of the customer. So to give you some examples of some of the kind of pitfalls and things that we see, because frequently we'll go into organizations and they'll say, look, we've got all of these processes, all you have to do is to put them into the system. But one of the things that's actually very difficult is to follow documents that are in sort of Word format. And again, one of the things I typically find is if we take that and we start to map that out into the process flow, you soon start to find holes in the processes, which makes it easy to understand why agents have struggled so much to be able to follow them. Because you'll actually find that there are logic branches that don't lead anywhere, that there are things that are ambiguous, that you could make several choices. So one of the, I think, key benefits of actually going through this structured process in the first place, irrespective of the technology we're deploying it in, is actually that challenging your own business processes and validating them. So here's just simply another example from the IRS with, again, another very complex document, multiple rules, multiple decision points, and again, we were able to take that, represent that as a process flow. Now, this might seem very manual, but ultimately what you are doing is building a blueprint, which then makes it very easy to build that data into the system through our drag and drop interface. I'm going to skip through because I'm very much saying the same thing, and I'm conscious of trying to move things along a little bit. So, why is it important? I think I've probably said a number of these things already. Basically, the agents don't have to be taught the processes now. They can follow the system, and they can focus very much then on customer service and the soft skills around that. They should always have supporting information available that helps them answer the question, so therefore they don't actually get stuck when the customer comes back with secondary questions. Processes can be adjusted without training, so that if you make changes in front of the agent, they are immediately available. So as long as your agents are following the process, it means that you can make business change very, very quickly. As long as you've captured your best process, then you're effectively giving every agent the tools for them to be performing in the same way as your best agents, and you get consistency and compliance, which is very, very valuable from a business perspective. And one of the elements of that consistency and compliance is if you capture that at the end of the process and you then save that back into a CRM system, you're reducing your wrap-up time, which is often quite a big part of AHT and a big area where you can gain some efficiency. So that's the process side of things. So why does eGain make that so much easier? I talked about the fact we have a drag and drop UI and all of those things you can go and see in the demo lounge or come and see us at the ideas bar and we can show you. We can actually pre-answer a number of questions by accessing databases and web services, and one of the things you saw as an example from EE of them doing that, though clearly without the customer data. We can profile and personalize that, so not every single interaction with the customer is going to be exactly the same. So depending on who the customer is, what device they've got, any other information that you hold about them in your systems, you can actually make that conversation that you're guiding the agent through very personalized and contextual and relevant. It logs all the questions and actions, as I've mentioned already, so that's powerful not just from an MI point of view, but also for things like RAP. And we can actually mix and match our process guidance along with straightforward articles. So taking somebody down a complex process isn't clearly the right answer in every case. What we can do is to simply present somebody with a solution article, effectively an FAQ, if we identify that that's the right thing to do. The other element to eGain, which I said I would touch on, is the fact that we are very much, case-based reasoning. This is not decision tree. So one of the things that means is that we can kind of optimize flows. The actual overhead and the building effort from an author's point of view is significantly reduced. So if we take this as a customer example, prior to using eGain, this is just a small section of a very complex process flow. And what we were able to do is to actually, by identifying kind of patterns and clusters, is to reduce that down into a much smaller process, because we basically create reusable objects, reusable clusters, and it's effectively, from the old days of coding, a kind of using go-tos and things like that. So we can actually get it down into the minimum amount of information. That's also great from a maintenance point of view, because if you have information in your knowledge base that changes, such as an interest rate, for instance, you can make sure that you only create and maintain that once, but that's reused elsewhere in the system where it needs to be. So you're not having to look to change information in multiple places in order to keep up with the business. So we've referred to this slide a number of times. In this particular, just as a reminder, we're talking about the process guidance, which sits very much around decision support. So, this is the bit at which you are representing your corporate processes and procedures, you're validating them, you're making sure that they're accurate. So machine learning and the new AI is very, very powerful in terms of determining the intent of getting you to the right place, but where you actually want somebody to be following something that you as a company have defined as best practice, then decision support on the processes is a very powerful tool to allow you the whole kind of governance to be able to do that. The next step, in fact, is once you have actually been able to define those processes, you've had agents following them, you have proven them to be correct, then you're already well placed to determine which of those can be automated going forwards. So, even as Sam was talking about with some of the new things we're doing with machine learning, ideally we're then hooking that into guided processes. We're getting the analytics back from that to determine which of those are most frequently accessed, which are most successful, which are giving the greatest benefit, and then the next stage on from that is to actually consider whether we can automate some of those and take the agent out of that process altogether. So, it's one of those things I could talk to you for hours about. I could show you lots and lots of examples. I've been doing this, as I mentioned, for a very long time. So, Guide to Success. eGain as an organization has been doing this for a very long time. If you're at all interested, then come and talk to us and we can have conversations about how we can help you to implement this. And we have a number of different services that can do so. Hopefully you've seen the demo lounges, you've maybe had a chat to the guys at the Try and Buy stand. So we are offering the kind of opportunity for you to test this technology out as a Try and Buy at no cost if you're interested. So go and speak to the guys on Try and Buy and sign up there. We also then have a range of professional services and kind of individuals such as myself who can help and guide you on a roadmap to implementation, help you with business cases, actually understanding what benefit you might derive from implementing technology such as this. So, final messaging. It works. I haven't given you lots of case studies here. I think the E one pretty much speaks for itself, but I could probably pull out another 20 or so and talk to you about figures and things if anybody was interested. We've been doing it for 25 years. You've heard some of those stories. We can make it easy for you. I think people are very much put off by the fact that it sounds complicated, but if you go through it in a structured process, it really isn't. And the benefits that you can derive from doing this are really significant. So come and have a conversation with us. Thank you.